I invite you to listen to me. All right. I'm convinced that if our church had one of those foyers, nobody would come into the service until halfway through my sermon. All right. So, there's been this running conversation in my home for the last year, since last April, mostly between Isaac and himself, and sometimes me, as to where half the Avengers went. So if you happen to follow any superhero movies, you knew that there was a big cliffhanger last year with this in the Avengers world. Half of them disappeared, we don't know where they went, and this Friday we get to find out. Isaac has been asking me to buy tickets in advance, and there are so many theories out there, and I'm pretty sure that if you have not seen any of the other superhero movies, you will be able to go to that one and enjoy it and be caught up to speed on what's going on. But you'll understand it better if you've watched the other ones. And I kind of feel like that's a little bit like Easter Sunday. Like, this is the Super Bowl of Sundays for preachers, you know? And in the sense that lots of people, for whatever reason, show up on Easter Sunday, and I'm really grateful that you do that. And where we're going to drop in today will make sense. But we've also been talking for the last two weeks about kind of the events leading up to this point in time surrounding the big theme of the Bible. So the idea is that the Bible, while it's made up of many smaller stories, has one big overriding plot theme to it, all right? A big arc. And the themes of that are creation, and then the fall of man, and then redemption, which is today, and then next week will be restoration. So creation, fall, redemption, restoration. And so we've talked about how God created the world and it was good, and how that points us to Him. And then last week was a kind of depressing sermon, and we talked about the fall of mankind and how that's destroyed the way we see ourselves, the way we see the world around us, and it kind of left us with a certain heaviness to that. And today, we get to this big theme of redemption on Easter Sunday. And I've mentioned that we could certainly go right to the text that talks about Jesus rising from the dead. That would be a great place to land on Easter Sunday. But we've also been talking about how these themes are reflected in smaller stories throughout Scripture. So I'm going to break things up. I'm going to shake things up a little this morning and go to a teaching that Jesus gave in the book of Luke, chapter 15, in which we see these four themes represented in a smaller story, and how it also points to the resurrection of Jesus as well. So in Luke 15, beginning in verses 1 and 2, a couple quick verses here. I'll just read them for you. They'll be on the screens as well. Jesus is pretty popular at this point, many followers, and it says, "Now the tax collectors and sinners were all drawing near to him." People on the margins of society, people who had sinful lifestyles, were deeply attracted to Jesus because they found his love compelling and his forgiveness overwhelming. And the Pharisees and the scribes are the very religious people. They follow all of the rules. They make up new rules that nobody even asked them to follow. And they grumbled about this, and they said, "This man," speaking of Jesus, "he receives sinners and he eats with them." And so the religious people were very upset that Jesus would hang out with and spend time and associate with sinful people. They thought that a good religious teacher would know that the people he associates with reflect on his moral character. And here he is hanging out with some well-known sinful types. And this is pretty good news for us, actually, coming into this, because all of us have parts of our story that we've been on the margins. We've been the outcasts. We've been far from Jesus. And so in response to this criticism, Jesus tells them three stories. And we're going to look at the last story, most popularly known as the parable of the prodigal son. And because in this parable, it showcases this theme of redemption so well. So we're going to skip to verse 11 now. And so remember, in response to this criticism from religious people complaining that he's spending time with sinners, Jesus tells this story. I'm just going to work my way through the story. Verse 11, Jesus said, There was a man who had 2 sons. He had 2 sons. This is important. Let's remember this at the front end. This is not just the story about the prodigal. Some of us have heard this story over and over again, and we think it's all about the younger son. But a better title for this parable is The Loving Father and His 2 Rebellious Sons, because we're going to find out that both of the sons break the father's heart in unique ways. We also have, in this just a short snapshot, this picture, this theme of creation here. We've got a man with 2 sons. They are his image bearers. They are going to inherit his wealth someday. They're going to take over the family estate and have responsibility. They would take care of the legacy of the family. It was their calling and their responsibility. We're going to discover that these 2 sons are going to inherit some wealth. This is a well-off kind of a family. And so this is a good inheritance. It takes us back to that kind of creation moment with Adam and Eve, that they're in the garden. They were stewards of something that was really good. Creation. They could explore and enjoy it. Verse 2, verse 12. The younger of these brothers said to his father, "Father, give me the share of the property that is coming to me." And he divided his property between them. Now, to our American ears, this might sound a little bit bold. Like, I don't think any of us probably had the audacity to go to our parents and say, "Hey, can I have an early inheritance?" But maybe, maybe if there was like a really big need in our life, maybe if we wanted to start a business or buy our first home or something, we might be able to summon the courage and say, "Hey, would it be possible for me just to have some of my inheritance a little bit early so that I can do this good thing?" And maybe you would have that kind of a positive response to that. But I think we all agree, even in American culture, this is a bold move to go to your parents and ask for your inheritance prior to their death. If it's unusual for us in American culture, it was unheard of to make this kind of request in ancient Middle Eastern culture. It's unheard of to make it in Middle Eastern culture today. The younger son is basically imparting to his dad the idea that he wishes his dad would die. The only thing keeping me from having what's mine, Dad, is the fact that you're still alive. You could interpret it this way: drop dead, Dad. Like, I just want my money and I want to get out of town. That's it. So to the people in Jesus' day, when he says just this short phrase, the younger son comes and asks his father, they would have been aghast. Who would do that? What an audacious, disrespectful kind of a thing. These are the kinds of requests that if you were to actually make, would get you disowned from your family, kicked out of society. You would be shamed deeply. And the way that he kind of asks for this money, for this inheritance, indicates that what he really wants is the money, not the responsibility. So someday he would inherit the estate when his father died. But along with the money comes caring for his mother, his unmarried sisters, the servants in the family, the land, the estate. There was an enormous responsibility to steward the family name that came along with the power. But the son wants none of that. He just wants to cut ties and go. And in this phrase, in this scene, we get quickly moved into the second theme of the fall. A broken relationship with the Father. Remember, Adam and Eve sin in the garden, and they go and hide because they recognize they're no longer in fellowship with the Father. Here we have a son on the run. Now, there's a silent partner in this scene, and that is the older son. As I studied this, and I owe a great deal of debt to Kenneth Bailey, a Middle Eastern commentator, and he says that it would have been expected in Middle Eastern society that the older brother intervened at this point, that he would act as a mediator. He would try to say to his younger brother, "What are you doing? That's a ridiculous request. Shame on you. Try it, ask Dad for forgiveness. You don't mean what you just said." And to go to the father and say, "Dad, he's young and foolish, and he didn't mean that," and try to repair this relationship. But the older brother is silent in this story. It makes you wonder if maybe the older brother's attitude might be lending itself to the younger brother wanting to get out of town, actually. He doesn't step into his role as the older brother here. So the father, and Jesus states it so quickly, he divided his property between them. lets the younger son go without cutting off a future relationship. So ordinarily, as I mentioned, the right thing to do in this society would have been to disown the son, to say, you are disrespectful, you're bringing shame on the family, I'm cutting ties with you. And yet, that's not, the father doesn't not just do that, but he actually gives the son a portion of his inheritance early. It says that he divides it between them, so he also gives the inheritance to the older brother, but the older brother chooses to remain in the family and not to exercise his rights at this point in time. Even though the father knows that what he's doing will be an embarrassment to his name in the community. The rest of the villagers would say, what a stupid dad. Why is he doing this? And yet he allows himself to be embarrassed so that he can have the opportunity to one day be restored with his younger son. He gives the son the freedom to make his own decision. And so, the younger son liquidates his estate. You know, it's not like the father went to the vault and turned the knob and kind of pulled out a stack of gold coins and handed it to him. You got to understand, the younger son's estate was land and sheep and goats. And you don't just go to the distant country and herd all these animals along. He had to liquidate his assets, and you do that by going to the village and selling it. And so everyone in the surrounding areas would have known what the younger son had done. This is not some family secret. This is a public embarrassment to the family. So verse 13, not many days later, the younger son gathered all that he had and took a journey into a far country. And there he squandered his property in reckless living. And when he had spent everything, a severe famine arose in that country, and he began to be in need. So he went and hired himself out to one of the citizens of that country, who sent him into his fields to feed pigs. And he was longing to be fed with the pods that the pigs ate, and no one gave him anything. So not many days later, about as long as it takes you to liquidate a bunch of sheep and cows, I don't know how long that takes, he heads off to the distant country. Jesus doesn't name the distant country. It's just obvious that it's someplace the Father is not. That's where the Son wants to be. Anywhere the Father is not welcome. Kyle Idleman wrote a book called Aha, all about this theme, and he claims that the distant country is the place in your life that God is not welcome. For some of us, it might be our entire lives. It might be portions of our lives that we don't want God involved in. It could be habits or thought patterns or relationships or physical places that we go that we know we shouldn't go. And so this is where the younger son goes. Someplace where the father can't find, he thinks the father can't find him, and someplace away from the father's rule on his life. We all know painful parts of our story where we've wandered into those places. And maybe we've excused that time in our lives because we were going to go make something for ourselves. I can't imagine that when the son left the father's home, he thought to himself, in a few months I'll be destitute. No, he was thinking, I'm going to go prove to my family, and make a name for myself. They'll regret the day that they let me go because I'm going to become a very wealthy man. But instead, things go badly for him. And so often for us, when we go to the distant country, we don't do so thinking that we're going to end up destitute. But pretty soon we find ourselves in a place where our lives are filled with anxiety and depression and repeated sin patterns we can't break out of, and we just look at ourselves and say, how did I get here? Like, this isn't where I saw my life years ago. I'm not where I wanted to be. The distant country is filled with the allure of excitement and freedom, but it leaves us destitute. You see, a good father puts boundaries in place for his sons. And the rebellious son pushes against those boundaries in the pursuit of his own desires. It is a dangerous place to be in the distant country. Verse 17. But when this younger son came to himself, he said, how many of my father's hired servants have more than enough bread, but I perish here with hunger? I will arise and go to my father, and I will say to him, Father, I have sinned against heaven and before you. I am no longer worthy to be called your son. Treat me as one of your hired servants. So he kind of has this awakening a moment for himself. And Jesus paints the most destitute picture that a Jewish man could find himself in. He is in a foreign country surrounded by foreign gods. He's starving, and he's so hungry he wants to eat pig food. That's like the unclean animal for the Jewish people, and he wants to eat the food the pigs are eating, and he doesn't have that even to eat. The religious leaders around Jesus, as he told this story, would have probably been filled with some, it serves you right. That's what he gets. Shame on him. And so after losing everything, he says, you know what, I'm going to go home. And I think this phrase is interesting. He arises. He says, I will arise on this Easter day when we celebrate the risen Christ, right? Here the Son is trying to fabricate his own resurrection. I will arise, I'm going to go back home, and I'm going to make things right with Dad. And the way I'm going to do this is I'm going to try to earn my way back. All right, so the first part of this sounds really great. Dad, I have messed up. I'm sorry. I've brought shame to you. And then he tacks on this weird thing at the end where he says, treat me like one of your hired servants. What he's doing here is he's asking his dad for a job. He's saying, Dad, I know I shouldn't be in the home, but if you could just let me become, a blue-collar worker, maybe I could earn my way back into the family. The son at this point still thinks he's got a money problem. It's not a money problem. He's got a relationship problem here. He's got a broken relationship with his dad. He's trying to manipulate his dad one more time into giving him this second chance to prove himself. And we just can't prove ourselves to the Father, right? We will never work hard enough. He doesn't, and interestingly, he doesn't ask the Father to become a slave. He doesn't want to be a slave. He just wants to be a hired hand. Give me a good job, Dad. I'll work my way back into your good graces. And a blue-collar worker would not have to live in the father's house with the brother. He would have lived in the village with the other villagers. And he wouldn't have to put up with his older brother either. Yeah, it's fascinating. He kind of retains his pride. But there's one piece to his story that he can't get around, and that is in Middle Eastern society, he's left his family. The whole village knows what deep shame he's caused. And so they were prepared, if he should ever have the audacity to return, that he would not be welcomed into the community. There was an actual ceremony called, if I understand this right, the Kazaza ceremony. Sounds great, right? It's not. Right? It's when the wanderer would come home, the villagers would break a pot to symbolize the broken relationship. They would shame him. Ancient Middle Eastern society was excellent at shame. They knew how to make a person feel miserable. They still do know how to make a person feel miserable. And so they were really good at shame, and the younger son knows, if I go home, I'm going to have to deal with this. I'm going to have to face the angry villagers who are probably going to ridicule me, spit on me, maybe beat me up a little bit, because they figure it's what I deserve. Verse 20. He takes his chances anyway, and he arose and came to his father. But while he was still a long way off, his father saw him and felt compassion and ran and embraced him and kissed him. Now, again, we read this and we might think, oh, that's sweet of the dad. This is unheard. As crazy as it was for the father to let the son go, to the religious leaders of that day, and to the disciples that were listening to this story, the idea that the father would embrace the son is even more unheard of. And the way in which he does it, let me just explain what would have been expected. The son should shuffle home, head down. They would have done the Kazaza ceremony. They would have spit on him and ridiculed him. He would have come to his father's house, beaten and bruised. His dad would have probably made him stay on the doorstep for a day or two, just in shame. And then, maybe, if the father was feeling especially gracious, he might let the son in to grovel for a bit. That would have been the norm. That's what you should have expected if you're in the situation that the son is in. What we see is the exact opposite of that. The son's self-made resurrection plan is usurped by the father's resurrection plan. In the father's action, we see the face of Jesus here. On this Easter Sunday, we see Jesus rising from the tomb in the power of the living Christ. And the father's run here, as he races to his son, was again a public act of humiliation. This man is well off. He's got servants. He's got a big estate. He probably hasn't run anywhere in 40 years since he was a little boy. In Middle Eastern, in our society, we like to run. I don't personally, but I've heard that some people run for fun. You didn't do that in the Middle East, right? Your servants ran on your behalf, and your slaves ran for you, but you did not run if you were a well-off and dignified individual. And you wore robes, and so what you've got here is a dad who's got to kind of hike up his robe and race to meet his son. He's racing to meet his son partly because he knows the shame the villagers are about to put him through. So you can imagine the son shuffles into town. Nothing's quiet in a Middle Eastern village. The villagers see him. They're preparing to really let this guy have it. When out of the blue, here comes this old man running. They've never seen such a thing before. All of the shame and ridicule and incredulity that they would have put on the son is now turned to put on the father. What does he do? What a stupid old man. What does he think he's doing? And in this moment, we see this beautiful picture of what Christ did for us, where he takes our shame on himself. Remember in the garden how God covers Adam and Eve's nakedness? This is what we got the Father doing here, raising to meet his Son to take away the shame of the villagers upon himself. It's beautiful. It's a clear demonstration of the atonement and of the cross. There's not a clearer picture in a micro story of the resurrection and redemption than right here. If the Son up to this point has been oblivious or ignored the deep pain that he's caused the Father, there's no way he can ignore it now. Now he is watching his Father be shamed by the village on his behalf. The Father is experiencing pain to restore him. The Father embraces him, kisses him. And in this moment of embrace, the Son moves into his rehearsed kind of confession. And he says, in verse 21, Father, I have sinned against heaven and before you. I am no longer worthy to be called your son. And then he stops. Isn't that something? He doesn't put in the part about treat me like one of their hired servants. In his Father's embrace, he recognizes that there's no way on earth he could possibly earn his way back into his Father's good graces. He's already there. Like, the Father has received him despite his life, despite the shame that he's brought on the family and the way that he's run away and all of the mistakes that he's made. He abandons his plan to earn his way back. And this is the call for Jesus today. He calls us to receive his love and forgiveness. There is no other way. If you are in a stage of your life where you're trying to work your way back to earn the Father's love, you're missing out on the point entirely. The Father's racing towards you, arms open, saying, I love you. Come back to the family. Like, be here with me. The Father, verse 22, the Father said to the servants, bring quickly the best robe and put it on him. And put a ring on his hand and shoes on his feet, and bring the fatted calf and kill it. And let us eat and celebrate, for this my son was dead and is alive again, and is lost and is found. And they began to celebrate. My son was dead and is alive again. Does that sound anything like Easter overtones to it at all? Could it be that the resurrection of Jesus provides resurrection power to us as well? We can be dead in our sins, and yet God wants to restore us and to bring life to us. The new outfit and the new ring signify authority. This is going to hint at what we're going to learn next week in this theme of restoration. The Father doesn't just forgive, but he restores the Son. Incredible. Incredible. So, we've kind of not talked about the older brother for a while. Think about this. If they split the estate, and the younger son has already blown all of his money and all of the things, all of his wealth, anything left in the father's house rightly belongs to whom? The older brother. So, whose calf are they sacrificing? The brother's calf. Whose robe are they putting on this? They're giving him the family ring? Oh, this is not sitting well with the older brother at all. All right, verse 25. Now his older son was in the field, and as he came and drew near the house, he heard the music and dancing. Now, he wouldn't have been in the field working. He's a well-respected son. He would have been, sitting in the shade, overseeing the workers. And as he returns, he calls one of the servants and asks what these things meant. And he said to him, "Your brother has come, and your father has killed the fatted calf, because he has received him back safe and sound." But he was angry and refused to go in. Okay, now let's just pause for a second. Why is Jesus telling this story to the religious leaders? They're angry that Jesus is eating with sinful people. And they're saying, if you knew what you were doing, Jesus, this is a bad decision. You shouldn't associate with these sinful people. I think that they're probably kind of really getting the picture here. What is the older brother upset with? That the father is eating with the younger son. He's invited him back. He's having a meal with him. The meal signifies that he has welcomed him back into the family. Jesus tells a story in which the hero eats with the sinner. Kenneth Bailey says, for some people, grace is amazing. For other people, grace is infuriating. And that's what we find here with the older brother. The older son now has his own moment of rebellion. Even if he didn't like what his dad was doing, cultural expectations would have been that he would go in and participate in the feast. Maybe he would have had a bad attitude about it, but he would have shown up. But now, he also brings shame on the family very publicly by saying, I'm not going in. I'm staying out here, outside. What will the father do with him now? The father has shown love to the wandering son, but what will he do with the arrogant brother? Remember how last week, Adam and Eve, after they sinned, they're in the garden, they're hiding in the bushes, ashamed to be with the father, and it says that God still shows up to pursue them. He calls out to them. We see this exact thing echoed right here. Listen to this. The father comes out and speaks to the older brother. The father pursues not only the rebellious, self-loathing son, but also the rebellious, self-righteous son. Both of these sons have caused deep and are causing deep pain to the father. And yet, listen to this. The father came out and entreated him. He's begging him. And he answered his father, "Look, these many years I have served you." What a way to talk to your dad. I have served you, Dad. I have never disobeyed your command. I doubt that's true, right? Yet, you have never even gave me a young goat that I might celebrate with my friends. But when this son of yours comes, who has devoured your property with prostitutes, you killed a fatted calf for him. The son doesn't even open his conversation with the respectful, "Oh, Father." He just lays into him, probably publicly. People are listening. He boasts he's never broken a rule, but he's also broken his father's heart, just like the younger brother broke the father's heart. The older son thinks it's all about obedience, but really the father is trying to say it's about intimacy with me. We have a relationship here. The story of the older son tells us that it's possible to live within the boundaries of family life, but still have an attitude of superiority and resentment that keep us from the Father's heart. We can do all the right things. We can go to church every Sunday. We can behave like good Christian people and still never know the love of the Father and have a distorted perspective of Him. The Father says, "My son, you are always with me, and all that is mine is yours." What powerful words. I'm not going to disown you either. What I've given you is yours. It was fitting to celebrate and to be glad, for this brother was dead and is alive. He was lost and is found. Interesting how the son, when he's complaining to the dad, says to the dad, "Your son has returned home." He's distancing himself from his brother. And when the father speaks to the older brother about the younger brother, I'm probably completely confused you now. He doesn't say, "My son returns." He says, "Your brother has come home." Wow. Wow. This is the end of the parable. Like, we don't know how the older brother responds. We're struck with the weight of the love of the father for the restored wandering son. But the reason he leaves it like this is because he's trying to make a point to the religious leaders that are sitting around him, either at this point very angry with Jesus, or maybe God has warmed their heart and they're starting to recognize the hypocrisy in their lives. Commonplace. Let's ponder the magnitude of this story. Jesus is calling to both those who are hurting and marginalized and in the far country, who have not experienced the love of the Father in a long time, as well as the belligerent sons and daughters who have never left home but are just as far from the Father's love. Maybe as you listen today, you can kind of identify where you are in the story. You know there's places in your life that you kind of distance yourself from God. Maybe God is asking you today to represent the heart of love and grace to go to unlikely places. But the reality is we can't be agents of the love of the Father until we've experienced it ourselves. It's possible that in a sermon like this, you might be feeling something inside that you've not felt for a while. Like a little discomfort or kind of like a warming in your heart, like, God, I think maybe God's saying something to me in this. It would be wise to pay attention to that. Like, He is a God, that's the Spirit of God moving in you. If you feel His movement in your heart today, this is the Father racing to meet you. This is Him inviting you in. Take a step today into the arms of Jesus. You can do this in a couple of ways. You can, if you want to have someone walk with you through this, I would invite you. You can fill out a connection card, and I'd be happy to get coffee with you. If you want somebody to pray with you as the worship team leads us in our closing psalms, then I'll be behind the counter. I'm happy to pray with anyone that just kind of wants to maybe reorder their heart towards the Father today as well. But let's just not leave unaware of the resurrection power, the restoring power of Jesus in our lives. Let's pray together. Holy Spirit, I pray that right now, maybe you're whispering, you're running towards some of us who are outside the Father's home. We might be outside in indifference and anger, or we might be outside in rebellion and just we know we've been making decisions in our lives that don't honor you. But Jesus, the call of the Father into His arms exists for all of us. And so I pray that you would bring your children close to you today. I ask this in Jesus' name. Amen.